Great. So, morning all. I'm going to be talking about effective reflective practice, which, as a tongue twister, was certainly easier to type than it is to say. But yeah, if we go to the next slide, please. I'm going to just to summarize what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to very quickly talk about what reflection is, or more specifically, self-reflection, what its value is, what you actually need to reflect, and then I'm going to just discuss, at least from my perspective, how I've tried to integrate reflection into my personal practice. Next slide, please. So really kind of zooming out at the highest level, reflection is a form of self-communication. There are a variety, there's almost a century of academic literature on this now, and there's a whole number of variety of models and tools for approaching reflection. But in a really broad brush term, you can understand it as a process of communication with yourself. And the approach it takes is having a kind of analytical model. So this is all through analysis, understanding your feelings and thoughts, and how they are situated in events and then mediated in your behavior. And the idea there is that through that analytical model, you can seek to integrate your feelings, your thoughts, and understand how that's played out through the events and your behavior. And you integrate the whole experience and you build your self-awareness. And the name self-reflection is visually apt. In integrating the experience, the idea is that there's self-recognition and a great understanding of self that emerges. Next slide, please. So to continue the kind of visual metaphor here, one of the two key physical processes in creating a rainbow is the total internal reflection in the little drops of rain or mist that bring the light to you. And so there's kind of that metaphor that can be made to self-reflection, in that what you're doing there is you're looking to shine a positive light on events as you've seen them and your behavior in them. And you're drawing out the color in them, basically, to kind of better see what was actually there. So next slide, please. So carrying on the rainbow color scheme, I'm not going to talk too much about particular actual models of reflection. There's a wide variety of them, and many of them are suited in particular contexts. But to use the Kolb reflective learning cycle, starting from a kind of the red color part of the rainbow, can think of having your experience, the thing that actually happened. Then move through into how you've experimented or how you've acted for, subsequent to that. And then finally, how you've approached that in your mind, how you've initially understood it. And then finally, what you've taken away from it, your reflection, your understanding. I've drawn some arrows here to show that this is a circle, because every day is a new day, and we carry on propagating our experiences through this cycle to continue again and again. And so reflection is in a way the final stage, but it's that cycle. It's continuing it and making sure that we draw out the lessons as we go forward. Next slide, please. I think there's potential to better understand reflection by also understanding what it's not. So it isn't necessarily a single well-defined practice. There are, like I say, a wide variety of different models and tools for self-reflection. And so there are a variety of approaches that may be better suited to individuals in particular circumstances. One thing I'd also want to get away from is this idea that it's necessarily a solo activity. If you have to think about what someone looked like when they were reflecting, you maybe think of someone lost in thought, trying to remember and understand things that happened to them. But it can be a communal activity. So things like Schwartz rounds, action learning sets, for instance, these are reflective activities that happen in group settings. And then also, I'd like to say that there are totally other distinct strategies for self-development, for instance, coaching, supervision, and mentorship, that have different strengths, but aren't the same as reflection, even though they may integrate it. So just having that clarity about what reflection isn't. Next slide, please. I didn't want to get lost in the detail of what different reflective models are, but there's some wonderful resources out there that kind of bring it into context for us. So HCPC have issued some advice with regards to it, as have HEE, and there's some links there. If the slides are provided after for you to further follow up if you're interested. Next slide, please. So hopefully there set a bit of context and ways of maybe kind of understanding what reflection is, what it can bring, and what it's not. But then I just wanted to dwell quickly on what the value of it is. I've kind of done this in a point-counterpoint way. So firstly, it is an opportunity to move beyond issues through self-care. I thought it was really interesting how Emma in her talk talked about reflection as being a way that she approached improving the imposter syndrome and how it presented. It's a perfect example of reflection in practice. And that's in distinction to it being a disheartening time where we only do it to better understand bad experiences. Reflection could be a positive thing. I think there can be a misconception sometimes that we only do reflections when there have been incidents, etc. It's not necessarily that. It's about improving and shining a positive light on things. Reflection is also an opportunity to show leadership and enable you to adapt to changing circumstances. And that's in distinction to it being a distraction from managing your day-to-day workload. Obviously, it's an additional thing to do, but it's not necessarily a distraction. It's an opportunity to see how things are changing around you and how you need to change in response to them and showing that leadership and making that move. I'd also like to say reflection is relevant to everyone who's developing and growing. Obviously, we're talking about it in an educational context, but I think we should prepare people to understand that this isn't just something they do as part of their training. It's hopefully a lifelong skill and a lifelong professional practice. And in that way, it's a keystone habit that supports that ability to understand how things are changing around you and how you're changing. It's not a tick box exercise to be endured. It's not a formal thing. It really is hopefully something that helps you. So next slide, please. So perhaps more in practical terms now, I kind of wanted to put down some advice about how I've tried to be more effective in my reflection. And I quickly realized I couldn't really be too prescriptive about it because different approaches will suit different people in different circumstances. But I did want to draw out some key commonalities to what I think underpins being more effective in your reflection. And that's giving yourself sufficient time, focus, and adequate space. Because otherwise, I think there's a tendency to blame ourselves or potentially our connection to the type of reflection we're trying. But if we don't have these things there to support it, it's not going to succeed. We have to think with a success mindset. So next slide, please. So at least for myself, how I've tried to approach this with regards to time, that's always a challenge. I think I've come to a kind of understanding that this will ebb and flow, at least my adherence to reflection. I won't be able to do it every week, but I do aim for that. And I certainly aim to not miss 2 weeks in a row. And what I've identified is a regularly quiet time for me, which tends to be Friday afternoons. New tasks don't tend to be initiated then. Occasionally we have to close things out, etc. And in which case I would miss the practice. But it is certainly in my calendar tends to be the quietest point. And so that's what I aim for. With regards to giving support to having focus, what I've found that really works for me is context switching. So not trying to involve the computer in any way in what I'm doing. I have my email open normally, I have Teams, etc. I have all the things I'm currently working on. There's just like a plethora of distractions. If I can remove myself from it, even just the act of just moving myself half a meter down my desk, so I'm looking at a notebook, not my screen, I find that opens up my horizons a bit more to think freer. And then adequate space. And this is perhaps more aspirational in that ideally I'd be on my own and ideally somewhere quiet. And sometimes, particularly on Friday afternoons, just because of the office space I'm in, I actually do get that. But that is perhaps fortuitous for me. But it's something that if you're around distractions, is not going to help you be reflective. And with this, I've kind of got a more free-form approach to reflection, but I at least I've given myself the mental space in which to engage in the practice. So next slide, please. So as a final slide to finish on, I just wanted to put this quote here which was from a famous guide and discussed reflection. And I think it's useful for us, particularly in the scientific context, to recognize what reflection is. It's not a scientific process. It's not kind of a protocol that can be tightly defined. It really should be understood as an art. And it's an art by which we come to deal with situations where there's significant uncertainty, instability, and value conflict. So we're trying to understand how those values play out. So yeah, I just like trying to understand it more as an art. So thank you for your time.